Well, I see you and I see me, so I think we're good.
Okay, good.
If there's anybody else, then I'm going to be a little concerned.
We'll have a problem.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Chris Czynszak with Decibel Geek and Rockin' Pod Expo, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
On the show with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, Eric Copeland. Now, I've known Eric, oh my gosh, it's been a day or two, I'm going to say.
It's been a few.
Yeah, although I think...
early 2000s, I think, is about when we, maybe 2005-ish, maybe, when we started to hook up with clients.
Long before you and I were even beginning to think about the podcast world.
Because there was a podcasting world.
Yeah, there you go. Show my age. Anyway, you have really developed something kind of beyond your norm. I mean, you're a music composer, you're a producer, you've created some, for me, that I've truly enjoyed, some wonderful jazz projects, and now you're working on helping artists understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but through YouTube on how artists can make money these days.
Well, it goes way beyond artists now. It's really all musicians. I've done my time as a music producer. Let's just put it that way. I didn't start out to be a music producer when I started music. Like everybody else, I wanted to write my own songs. And my big thought was, and my big dream was, even as a teenager, was to get a music publishing deal. Not a record deal, but a publishing deal. So I would drive from Lexington, Kentucky, where I'm from, to Nashville, and, go to BMI and say, who should I go talk to? Or some friend would have a friend who'd say, oh, I got a friend in Nashville, and we were only 3.5 hours. So now the problem was that Nashville was not exactly the music city for my particular music, which was mostly pop. And they wanted country. And then I started writing some gospel and Christian stuff. And Nashville was the place for that. But still, I was writing unique jazzy things. And, that wasn't necessarily what they were looking for at the time, except for a few jazz people that I got introduced to that did some kind of jazzy Christian records, or instrumental records and things like that. But finally, I didn't give up on my own music, but what happened is when you show your music to somebody, the first thing they do is, oh, that sounds very nice. Can you make some music for me? And when they find out you can do something, they want to hire you. And so that's what happened. And I became the guy who could record people. And next thing that I know, I am a music producer full time. And I quit my corporate job about 2000 and started full time producing people. I'd already been producing people on the weekends. For about those first 10 years, all I did was produce artists. And eventually in around 2005, 4 or 5, we moved to Nashville because I was going down there all the time to record. I had started to meet engineers and players and all that kind of stuff. And so, and then my business really took off because then I could offer people the ability to come to Nashville, which is where they wanted to be anyway. My genre at that time was mainly in the Christian gospel world. And as you know, Nashville, besides country, its next biggest probably industry would be the Christian industry, or at least it was. And so I moved down there and then I was in the thick of it, with people like yourself and photographers and video people and all the musicians and all the studios and all the engineers. And I was just, I was there in the with the barrel of monkeys, and I was a monkey, and I was just happy to be there.
In those days, it was such a different world than it is today. You know, we had Music Row, which really basically no longer exists. Now, by saying that, the record labels, the management firms, the publishing houses, everybody that was on Music Row, they've kind of splintered out to other areas. So now you go to Berry Hill or you go to Hendersonville or Franklin. That aspect of it has changed. Also, the other common denominator that you and I worked around and worked in at that time was the record business. We were still basically manufacturing and selling CDs. Downloads were out there. We were looking at them with somewhat kind of utter contempt and disdain, but then they eventually started to take over. The CD business went away. And really by about 2009, 2010, I believe, the downloads went away and we all started streaming. And that really changed the business model for someone such as yourself. I know it affected me from a record label standpoint, but it really had to change how you looked at doing business.
Yeah, all of the paradigms have changed. Luckily, for a person who was wanting, or at the time thought I was wanting to have a production company, it was the perfect time. I don't know if there was ever a better 20 years to be an independent music producer than 2000 to 2020. I think those 2 decades were your best possible chance to be an independent music producer and make full-time income, because we had a lot of things happening at the same time. The height of the CD was at 2000 before it started to fall. And so people were still making CDs, but what had happened was the industry did not know yet that they were about to go through a hard time in the year 2000. They didn't know that CDs were going to totally crash over the next 10 years. And that then MP3 and then especially Apple was going to come along, and then streaming was going to come along. They just didn't see that coming very well. But that opened the door, though, because everything started to change for labels, and indies suddenly could come and get services from Bob Bender in Nashville. Indies could suddenly come to Nashville and use the top musicians that they had been listening to for 20 years. And they could suddenly get the top Grammy-winning engineers and all that stuff. And I just provided that to them. And so it was a great time for me. I think the music business has gone through this entirely different change over the last 20 years, that it's recovered thanks to streaming, but now it's facing another threat with AI and stuff. But I even see that they're embracing that. I don't know if you saw recently that Universal is trying to make a deal with Google and allow people to use their artists' voices through AI means and monetize it. They're getting on this train from the beginning. They're not missing out like they missed out with MP3s. They're not missing out like they kind of got in with Steve Jobs a little. They embraced streaming pretty quickly, but it's been an interesting 20 years. But I will tell you, Bob, the last 10 years saw a real decline as artists realized that they couldn't sell CDs anymore. They quit being artists. And one of the reasons, and plus it kind of coincided with me going back to school. I went to MTSU and finished out my bachelor's. And then when I moved down here to Orlando, I went to school and got my master's, and I got it in composition, not business or anything like that, because I was really kind of trying to get back to my composer roots. And now that's where I am. And my channel really focuses on how to get into music licensing, how to be an artist and make money there. I just talked to an artist yesterday, a breakdancing DJ violinist who has 200 dates a year, and he's making 6 figures. I just had a podcast. I got done talking to another sync licensing guy who has a YouTube channel, but he also is involved with Beats and BeatStars and all that kind of stuff. So any and all music incomes is what I talk about on my channel, but it all comes from all this long and winding road through the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and now, with all these different music incomes. But luckily, I feel like I rode the independent artist producing thing through the best times that they could have had, because in 2010 or even in 2005 when we met, and I came to you with an artist, and we were still able to do things like press kits, like physical press kits, and publicity campaigns and TV and radio interviews. And we were still able to even get radio play as indies back then and compete there. And all that seems to have just kind of gone away a little bit.
For years and years, especially when I was at the label, I used to attend the Music Biz conference. And it would be in different cities. It'd be in San Antonio or Indianapolis or Kansas City or New York or wherever. And it was really the outlet where the record labels and the distribution companies all got together and they talked about the future of the record business. Now, I've discussed this in the past on other episodes. I think it was probably around 99 or 2000. I'm attending the conference. And I remember the guy, whoever the speaker was that day, getting up on stage, and he said, well, we're starting to see things like Napster and Morpheus and Kazaa. We're not really concerned about them. We don't think they're going to make a dent in the business. And the next year, it was kind of like, holy cow, we're really kind of in trouble at this point because they ignored that aspect of what was kind of coming up through the trenches. I've attended Music Biz probably after taking a little bit of a hiatus off. I've attended Music Biz the last 2 or 3 years, which is now held every year here in Nashville. And it is a totally, totally different world. We're talking about cryptocurrency. We're talking about Dolby Atmos. We're talking about, all the new ways to get your music not only recorded, but discovered and outletted, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And the average attendee at that thing is probably in their early to mid-20s. And that in itself is mind-blowing. The other aspect of it is I attend some of those workshops and panels and I walk out and I've got that deer in the headlight look. I don't understand some of what they're talking about. And I think AI is another perfect example because I think what we're doing is we're opening up another Pandora's box without realizing what all of those ramifications are. And are we really going to be able to make money? Now, one of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with, I think everything that's happened in the last 20 years has really leveled quite a bit the playing field for the independent artist.
Well, definitely. For all you people worried about AI in the music industry, do you really think it's going to be a bigger disruptor than the internet? Because the internet itself has there been a bigger disruptor ever as a technology than the internet itself? I mean, I remember being old enough to have to go to a college to have to even access the internet, and we would play computer games on there. And now the internet is part of our daily life. It's connected to us 24 hours a day. I mean, literally hands reach away to our phone or whatever. I want to go back to what you were saying about all the industry and Napster. One of the funniest stories that I love about the industry and Napster comes from a book called Appetite for Self-Destruction, The Spectacular Crash of the Record Industry, which is a great book, by the way. But in it, they talk about the story about the Napster guys going to the labels in the late 90s and saying, we have these MP3s, and I think this is even before the lawsuits, or maybe it was during the lawsuits or right before the lawsuits or whatever started happening. But the Napster guys go to the labels, and the labels say, why in the world would we want to sell MP3s? We're selling CDs hand over fist. This is 1999. We're selling, it's like the people at the top of the cliff and they're about to walk off a cliff and they're looking backwards going, we're going to be walking forever. We're going to be selling CDs. They've never sold more than they've sold this year in 2000. Why would we want, and MP3s, who's going to want that? It takes forever to download. Are they going to sit there for 5 minutes and wait for a song to download? No one's ever going to want that. Short-sightedness at its best. And that's why I think you see the industry now jumping on all of these things you're talking about at these conventions. And AI, they're looking at it. And like I said, already today, making deals, or trying to figure out how to make deals to be on top of it, how to make income from it, and make sure that they jumped on Spotify pretty darn quick. They didn't wait around for Spotify. They got right. As a matter of fact, the only people making money out of Spotify are labels, not Spotify. Spotify doesn't even make any money. And the artists, sometimes indies artists don't make that much money off Spotify. But the labels got in quick and they got the big deal with Spotify. lo-fi. And I think that they adopted quickly with that. And I think they're trying to adopt quickly with AI as well. And I think that's why you're seeing this talked about now. Everybody's trying to figure out an angle. Everybody's trying to, I see YouTube channels of people I've been following for years, and suddenly they've switched over talking about AI because it's the trendy thing to talk about. So I think we see this with, I just think everybody knows they have to be an early adopter now and get in on the game, get in early. It's almost like a stock market thing. They want to get in early on the thing before everybody's in it and own their space in it.
We're going to take a break, get a word in for a couple of our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Eric Copeland.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bronstein with Life's Jam. Check out my episode on the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics, all written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message. Thanks.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio on the show with us today, Eric Copeland. During the break, we were talking about a little bit of other things that you have gotten yourself involved in, including teaching music. You have a dozen or so clients that you continue to work with. In your world, in your realm, with all the things that have changed, and I kind of want to focus on this for a few minutes if you don't mind, is how does the person who wants to be actively involved in the music industry these days, how do they go about making money? Because you said it, the independent artist is not necessarily going to make money on streaming. So where does that income bracket come into now?
Well, this is the reason you said earlier. Do you still work with artists? And I said I really don't work with artists or focus on artists as much because the problem with the internet, what happened was, and I was a prime instigator in this, is that I helped a lot of artists have what I call fake music careers. In other words, I would create them a great record. They would come to Nashville. We still call them records. They would create an album, and their plan from the start was to make a CD. Now, and people are making more singles then, but their plan was to make a CD and go out and do gigs and sell it. Well, the plan worked all the way up to making the CD. Could make them a great CD with great musicians. I could take them from zero, from never being in a studio before, to having an album, despite what their voice was like, depending on what their voice was like, that was as good as it could be made in Nashville. I mean, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying we had those people, right? You could send people to producers and you knew it was just going to come out sounding great quality-wise because those are those people. But where it would fall down, and then I could do all their setup, web setup. I could do their artwork. I could do their social media setup. I could do all that kind of stuff. I could make their CDs for them and deliver them to their door. I have a saying, I could lead an artist into the studio, but I cannot make them tour. And the problem was that's where it would fall down. Once the boxes rolled into their house, then they said, oh, I don't know what to do from here. And they would not go out and tour. And so then all that's left, and this is something we still do to this day in 2023, is they put a single out on Spotify. We make a music video, usually like a lyric video. We put it on YouTube, and we push the YouTube out, and we push the YouTube to their Facebook page or whatever other pages they have. And that's the extent of marketing. That's it. That's all they will try to do or pay to do. And so I am trying to push people into other roads. There's other things. If you do go to Nashville or when I work on great songs now with artists or let's say co-writers or partners, I will create a song that not only could be used by them, but could be used by a television show, or could be used in a film, or could be used for advertising uses, or could be used for something else, so that they have another income stream possibility, a back end that, and that's what licensing has turned into be, is a back end for the music that we never had before. And independent artists never had back end. They didn't tour enough, or they didn't get enough radio play to get PRO money. They didn't do enough stuff that would bring them royalties. So there really was no back end in it. That's why I always was paid up front, and the players and everybody was always paid. I was never a producer that got involved in the back end of people's stuff because there was no back end. So I never got involved in the back end. Tell you what, Eric, you produce this. I'll give you 50% of everything I make. I'm like, I am not collecting those nickels. So you may have all of your back end. I want you to have it. You're going to need it because likely you're not going to do anything with it. So I think now what we have to do is look at other income streams. And I have always had a dozen income streams as a music person, as a full-time music maker making a living. I not only produced, but I also did people's websites. I also did music videos. I also did their art. I also helped them with consulting. I also helped them with their everything after the album. And I did all of those things. And now all I've done is added teaching and added licensing onto that. And we just spoke on my podcast today about beats, which is a whole nother thing, selling beats to rappers through BeatStars and things like that. And there is a whole host of things that I talk about, from sync licensing to non-exclusive licensing for YouTube, music publishing and different kinds of royalties. And then I still do a little music production for people. And so there's just all these different things. And I think artists these days, if they want to make music income, they're going to have to either be like the breakdancing violinist and do 200 shows a year because you're unique and different, or you're going to have a lot of different kinds of incomes. And it might include teaching on your own channel, talking to people about how you were able to make an album and go out and do things. We live in a society where people they need to get information from you. They want to learn how you did what you did so they can do what they did. So that's basically what I do.
I think it's so interesting that you brought up about the breakdancing violinist, because I will have people come to Nashville, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pretty, or kind of the unshaven, grizzly, no sleeves on the shirt type artists, and they go, how can I make it in the music business? And right now we're talking about country music, but it kind of fits all of the genres when you start stacking them side by side. And that is you have to be different, you have to be unique, because guess what? Especially in Music City, we have enough blonde-haired, blue-eyed artists who can sing. And all of them can sing good. Some of them can sing great. What's going to set you apart from everybody else in the world? And then the other thing is, you mentioned sync licensing, and we talk about that quite a bit, in that, sit down and watch something on television, watch a movie or watch a television show or watch a commercial, and don't listen to the dialogue, listen to the music. And somebody has created that at some point to put that out there.
I think talking about your artists that come into town and saying, how do I make it in the music business? I think the problem is what they expect is that a label will hear them and be so entranced by their magical voice or look or whatever that they will develop them. But the problem is labels haven't been developing artists since the 90s. In the 80s, they were developing artists, and they had an artist development section. But in the 90s, they changed that section to be called product development. And now they allow all the development needs to happen by the artist or by an indie label that is developing that artist. And so I don't think that anymore you can walk into Nashville and hope that someone will see your genius or see your beauty or see your amazing skill and say, oh, I want to develop that. You need to start developing it yourself where you are and develop something unique, and then go out and do the work, because nobody in the music business is going to be interested in you unless you have something they can already make money off of. And that's why music licensing works so well, because someone like me makes a tune, and then I approach a library with a tune or a bunch of tunes and say, hey, would you like these sports football type sounding songs to put into your library? And they're like, yes, I would love that, because we have Fox Sports calling us every football season, and they need new music to put behind this stuff. But they need artist music too. They really love artists. If music supervisors love finding that new independent artist with a well-produced or just indie-produced type of thing that they can put in some TV show, and everybody else is like, where'd you find that artist? And so in some ways, music supervisors are the new A&R people to some extent. And there's $5,000, $10,000 that can be made for one good major network television show, CSI show. They've got a $30,000 budget per show for music. And so people don't realize this kind of thing. It's one of those things that I think artists, I wish I knew about this 10 years ago, or I would have been developing artists for this kind of market. But it wasn't something that came out until YouTubers started talking about it in the late teens or early 2020s. And especially around COVID, when everybody was stuck at home and all they could do is create tracks and try to find a place to put them. And then licensing has become a much bigger thing to talk about and a much popular topic.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for a couple of our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Eric Copeland.
Hey, this is April Ryder, and you are listening to The Business Side of Music with the fantastic Bob Bender.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hey, this is Jack Sharkey, host of the Between the Notes podcast. Are you a music fan? Do you still get a thrill from your favorite songs? Are you curious about the history, development, and tech behind it all? Well, then join us each week as we explore that and more on the Between the Notes podcast. Check us out on Facebook at Podcast Between the Notes, and find us everywhere you get your podcasts.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Eric Copeland is joining us. During the break, Eric actually asked me a question, which is kind of putting the host in the spotlight. But yeah, go ahead and ask that question.
Putting the hand on the other foot, as I've heard it said.
Exactly.
So when we talked a little earlier in this interview, we talked about 20 years ago when we met, and we were working with an artist, and we were making sure he had a great fold-out press kit. We were making sure he had an EPK, which back in that time, EPKs have been everything from video cassettes to CDs to DVDs and all that kind of stuff, and making sure that we hired a publicist to do a publicity campaign, and that we did TV and radio interviews, and Are any of those still valid for the current artists? Even, let's say, ones that are coming to town, or ones that are already somewhat known, but they're independent and they're trying to make it on their own. Are those somewhat valid to you? Do you get asked that question, and do you help people do those things still?
I think one of the biggest things I see now is, you and I talked about the electronic press kit. That I think has really become the digital press kit. You create something that you can send via email, or you can have them go to your website. Social media is playing such a key component in expressing who you are and what your music about. I've had some conversations with some dear publicist friends of mine who have all said to the T that their job of being a publicist has changed so dramatically in the last 10 or 20 years that some of them are going, I don't know why I'm a publicist anymore, because social media takes up so much of that. I think the other component is radio and television that you mentioned. I think television, to a certain extent, if you can get on a national level with an interview. I think getting on a local TV show in the morning or the afternoon really does nothing but maybe satisfy your own ego. I'm not sure it feeds into the development of what you're trying to accomplish. And radio as we know it, I think you're almost better off being a guest on a podcast. Now, with that being said, there's 2.7 million podcast shows out there. It's finding your niche. It's finding who you are and what you are and being able to reach that audience. I think if you get on a show that really doesn't, if you're a pop artist and you're on a heavy metal podcast, you're just going to get chewed up and spit out. The listeners, well, first of all, the podcaster's not going to be real thrilled about it if they even book you. And the other thing is you're probably going to lose those listeners for that niche. So it's really fine-tuning your career and who you are as that artist. I think that is so vitally important these days.
The best EPK you could have now, press kit, EPK, publicity, TV, radio, is all wrapped up in one word: YouTube. If you can create a YouTube channel, I had a kid in my last class, and he had over 1,000 subscribers on this channel for his rapping R&B thing that he's doing, and he also has a lot of subscribers on Instagram, and that's his base, and he does all his media for that. All that what we used to call EPK stuff is there: the talking videos, the music videos, the lyric videos, all of that kind of stuff. When I started this channel, Make Music Income, that's on YouTube, I never imagined that. I thought maybe I might have a few people who might be interested in what I had to say about making different kinds of things of income. But I never imagined I would be heading towards 10,000 subscribers and talking to composers every day, but also to everybody from songwriters to artists to composers, probably more composers than anything, since I talk about licensing a lot on there. But again, with the artist, I think I just saw a video that just came up on my feed last night. I watch YouTube like a TV show sometimes. I watch it on my TV, and it'll bring up this feed. It brought this feed of somebody doing a cover of I Saw the Sign, and it was just some artist. And I watched a little bit of it. It was well produced. It was nice video, and then I just investigated their channel, and they talk on that channel and they do covers, they do originals, and they have a Patreon, and they have all these other things, where they send people, and they have a strong Instagram, they have a strong, and all that stuff, and they have a strong TikTok. All that stuff works together now as your EPK, I think,
And I think the other thing you just brought up is when we go back to the record labels, how do you get a record label interested in you? It's everything you just said. You have to have that super, super strong social media. You have to have thousands upon thousands of followers that they can see those numbers and know that you have created something. Now, with that being said, at that point, you have to make the decision. Do I actually need a record label and give up ownership of whatever I've created? Or might as well just go out and do what I'm doing and I own 100% of it?
Yeah, that's the big question now, is not do I get a deal, do I need a deal, especially if you've already got thousands or tens of thousands or 100,000 followers that follow your Spotify, then you're at that point, or your YouTube, at that point, you're your own record label. You don't need to hire a publicist. All you need to do is continue making content and make content. And again, eventually it has to be content that people are going to feel like they're getting something from, and not just you just saying, hey, look at me, but also maybe giving them something and showing them behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff, which was what EPK used to be. Behind the scenes stuff, and just candid interviews that the artist was just talking about. That's what YouTube is. So I think labels are going to look at that, and they're going to look at numbers. They're going to look what kind of Spotify numbers are we talking about? What kind of YouTube numbers are we going to talk about? What kind of Instagram and TikTok numbers are we talking about? But with the way things monetize now, if you're smart, you can monetize this without having to get a record deal and giving up all that percentage. So
let's talk about our listeners on the show. If they want to get a hold of you and look at what it is that you do, how can they go about finding Eric Copeland?
Well, the easiest way is to look at my YouTube channels, Make Music Income, and you can go to the website, makemusicincome.com, and that just has a lot of information and the latest videos that I've made. And I make videos on all sorts of music incomes. And so if you're interested in all of those, and I've talked to industry people before. I've talked to a friend on Music Row from Curb about royalties, but I also talk to a lot of people in a lot of different spaces. I also have my own composing site called it's a new YouTube brand that I'm trying to build. It's called Hello Composers, and it really just talks about composing because I did my master's in that. And then if you just want to hear my music, you can go to ericcopelandmusic.com. I usually just put up everything that I do there, and so my personal music is there. So there's lots of places to find me, and it's just type in Make Music Income. You'll see it all. You'll see way more of me than you want to see, for sure. And I do have a podcast as well that's doing okay, and I do that every Friday, and then it airs on the podcast channels on Monday.
What's that podcast called?
It's also called the Make Music Income Podcast.
There you go. Eric, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.